There we are. Just trying to find the unmute button. Hello, everybody. Good morning and welcome to our Building the House of Stonewall event today in celebration of LGBT History Month. I'm Rebecca Clark and I'm the Head of Membership at the Chartered Institute of Housing, who have organised the event today and done all of the whizzy stuff in the background to bring this to you. If anyone, I can see in the chat, some people have found the chat and a couple of people are having issues. We are trying to get round to everybody in the background to sort any of those out. So if you are having any difficulties seeing, hearing us, or you're unable to access anything, then please do let us know either by email or in the chat if you're able to, and we'll try our best to help you so you can join us today. So as I mentioned, this event is in celebration of LGBT History Month, and it's the first of its kind that the CIH has actually led on. We've made a very strong commitment in the last 12 to 18 months to really support and champion equality, diversity and inclusion across the sector, and moving forwards that will be a real mainstay of our professional standards framework that we're developing, which is designed to provide some standards and guidelines for the sector and for housing professionals on what good looks like. And certainly lots of the principles in there will revolve around equality, diversity and inclusion. So moving forwards, with all of you here supporting today, I imagine you've got a strong commitment and passion yourselves. If you do have any feedback whatsoever, then please do let us know. And we do also have a member steering group established now for equality, diversity and inclusion, and we meet on the second Friday of every month. So if anybody does want to join and commit more and even come and listen to the things that we're talking about, then please do again let us know and we can send you some more information. So today wouldn't have been possible. I'm not going to talk for too long, but I do want to say a special thank you now, as well as at the end, before I forget, to Kat Haldane and the rest of the staff at Stonewall Housing, who are our main partners for today's event. Hence the title, Building the House of Stonewall. So we will hear lots of information today, really, that raises awareness, increases understanding, builds networks, but also champions the right things when it comes to issues experienced by the LGBTQ plus community when it comes to housing. And hearing the lived experiences of some of the speakers today, I think will really kind of hit home for people and be quite moving. I'd also like to thank our other partners for today's event. So House Proud will be joining us via John Stevens in a short while to do a short presentation. But then also the National Housing Federation and Beth, who has supported us throughout in delivering today's event and promoting it. And thank you to all of you for joining us. So without further ado, I'm going to not steal any more thunder, and hopefully we'll be able to bring Stephen McIntyre to the stage, who's the Chief Executive of Stonewall Housing, to start us off on our first presentation. And I'll keep an eye on the questions box and everything, so please do keep chatting away in the background. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Rebecca, and good morning, everybody. I am, as Rebecca said, Stephen McIntyre, and I am the Chief Exec of Stonewall Housing. And my pronouns are he, him, and his. I'm just delighted to be able to come to this event today, and thank you very much to everybody for coming. It's lovely to be able to welcome you and to celebrate LGBTQ plus History Month. And I want to say a special thank you as well to the Chartered Institute of Housing for really helping us to organise today's event and for hosting for us, as well as the National Housing Federation, who are real champions of the work of both Stonewall Housing and LGBTQ plus housing issues in general. I also want to thank our colleagues from House Proud, who we're really delighted to have with us today, as well as all of our guest speakers who you'll get to meet as we go through. So let me tell you a little bit about what I'm going to talk about today. So first of all, I'm going to give an introduction to Stonewall Housing, really just to give you an overview of the work that we currently do. And I want to really take a bit of a step back and think about our foundations and how we were founded, and to talk a little bit about our history, especially to celebrate LGBTQ plus History Month. I also want to have a conversation with you about the level of need. So when we talk about LGBTQ plus housing issues in the UK, what is it exactly that we're talking about? I'm going to just share my perspective of that with you. And then I want to answer the question that we get asked most often whenever we're out and about talking to people about Stonewall housing, which is the question of why is it that we need specific services for LGBTQ plus people? What is the reason for that? And then I'm going to end my presentation by thinking about our future planning in Stonewall housing. And really what I want to demonstrate to everybody today is our commitment to partnership working. And I want to invite all of you to think about how we might be able to work together to really improve things for LGBTQ plus people who need the support of the housing sector. And I'm going to kind of do a bit of a call to action, you know, to really help you think about what you might be able to do and what support you might need with it as well. So let me talk to you about what we do already. So Stonewall Housing works exclusively with LGBTQ plus people. We don't work with anyone else. These are only the people that we provide support to. And every year we work with around 1,200 people, something like that. We've actually seen an increase in the last year over lockdown, but it's usually about 1,200 people that we work with every year. The vast majority of our service users are in London. So we do a lot of our work with people who need support in London. But we have seen an increase over the last couple of years, really, of people who are contacting us from outside of London. And that's why we're really delighted to see so many people here from all over the UK to really help have this conversation together as well. The other thing which I think is quite interesting is that we have seen an increase in the number of people who are care leavers contacting us. So that younger end of the spectrum, people who are LGBTQ plus and who are also leaving care and, you know, want some additional support. And we've also seen an increase at the other end of the scale. So people who are over 55 who are LGBTQ plus and need some support around their housing situation. So it's quite an interesting mix of people that we work with. And one of the things that we feel very proud of is that we work with everybody who's LGBTQ plus and either homeless or at risk of homelessness, regardless of their age. So we feel very proud about that. The four things that we do are advice and advocacy. So similar to other organizations, we run an advice line where we might give some signposting to people. We might give them some basic advice, really just kind of help them navigate the housing system and teach them some of the things that they need in order to move that forward. Where the needs are a bit more complex, or perhaps the person needs some additional support, then we would escalate that to our casework service. And this is where we provide advocacy. And the way I discuss this and the way I think about it is, rather than just kind of showing someone what they should do, oh, look, you need to do A, B, and C, what we do is we hold their hand and we do it with them. So we really go through that process with them. And we continue to work with people until their issues are resolved, usually somewhere between 4 and 8 weeks, but we're not defined by that. The second part of our service is our supported accommodation. So we have a number of houses throughout London where we work with people who are not quite ready to have their own tenancy for whatever reason. It may be because they're young and leaving care. Some of our service users are like that. It may be that they have particular issues around drugs and alcohol or mental health. You know, there's a number of different reasons, but it looks like the person isn't quite ready for their independent tenancy. And our job is to help them through that journey. And so we will work with some people from between 6 months and 18 months, something like that, to really help identify what support they need and then work with them quite intensively to move them forward with that as well. We also provide a floating support service. And so this is kind of similar to supported accommodation, but people don't have to come and live in our houses in order to get this support. It may be that they live in one of our partner agencies. So it could be a housing association that has a specific need around LGBTQ plus issues. And we'll provide the floating support to go and meet with that person, engage with them, figure out what kind of support they need, and then put together a plan specific for them. We do this with local authorities, where it's particularly around young people who aren't quite at the stage where they need supported accommodation, but the local authority are concerned they might not be able to live completely independently. And we also do it with our partner agencies, both in housing associations and the charity sector as well. And then the fourth part of our work is around training and consultancy. And this is about helping other organizations to make sure that they're doing everything they can to include LGBTQ plus people in the work that they do. So to really be inclusive. And our Director of Education and Engagement is here today, Tina, who's going to talk a little bit more about the work that we can do around training, as well as our inclusion standard. So that's kind of the work that Stonewall Housing does at the minute. And the way we see that is really as a foundation for helping to build the House of Stonewall. And this is kind of where today's event comes in and where we got the title for today's event. So if you think that everything we're currently doing as a bit of a foundation for us to work from and to engage with our partner agencies and think, right, okay, what do we do next? Now, the House of Stonewall is something that we are very proud of. The House of Stonewall, you can think of it like a collaboration, a bit of a collective. And it's everybody who believes in what we are trying to achieve, all working together to make sure that LGBTQ plus people have got somewhere safe to live. So some of our members of the House of Stonewall are our ambassadors, and they're people who have been through the process. They may have lived in one of our houses or had support from one of our key workers or contacted the advice line. And now they're using their story to kind of really help to elevate the message and let people know just how important it is to have LGBTQ plus specific support. And we're very lucky today because we've got one of our ambassadors, Cory, here, who's going to share with us his experiences of coming through Stonewall Housing and what kind of impact it had on for him as well. And we also have, the House of Stonewall is also made up of people who champion our mission. So these are people that might not have lived experience themselves, but they really believe in what we are trying to do. So they do things like help spread the word about the work that we're doing. They get involved in our fundraising. One of our champions who we're very proud of is Rebecca, who is chairing today. She's a House of Stonewall champion. And one of the things that she's done is helped us to create this event. So it's that kind of contributing to what we're doing in any way you can and really being a champion for the work of LGBTQ plus people who need support around their housing. And then we also, the other parts of the House of Stonewall are people who commission us to deliver work. They join us in our mission. People who buy our training and who engage with our inclusion standard, you know, all of the different ways that people can really demonstrate to themselves, demonstrate to their employees, and demonstrate to their service users, their residents, their customers, that they're really committed to inclusion and committed to LGBTQ plus inclusion. Kat, who is our founder of the House of Stonewall, is here today as well, and she's going to talk a little bit more about that so that you can get a really good picture of what that looks like. What I want to do now is kind of have a look at our history and look at this picture. Isn't it gorgeous? This is one of our earliest pieces of memorabilia that we have for Stonewall Housing. Kat found it in our archives for us, and you can see the date just at the top. It's 1984, and it's just 1 year after we were founded that we found this. So back in 1983, a group of LGBTQ plus people, a group of lesbians actually came together, and some of them had experienced homelessness themselves. Some of them had been found themselves homeless after they came out. And what the other thing that they saw was that there was lots of people on the streets who were LGBTQ plus. And if you think back to that kind of 1983, if anybody's been watching the It's a Sin program, you know, you can imagine what it was like in London then. There was this sense of, if you came to London, you would find your people, you know, people who grew up in villages and towns around the UK where they didn't really know any gay people or any lesbian people. And they were like, actually, you know, like, I need to go to the city and find myself and, you know, kind of party and, you know, all of that kind of stuff, really kind of engage with their community. And a lot of that was happening. And what some young people were finding was that actually they became very vulnerable when they got to London, and they were ending up on the streets. And so this group of women kind of saw this happening and thought, look, we need to do something about this. They had approached some mainstream housing providers. They find it very challenging to get support for themselves. And they also had experienced quite a lot of discrimination. Again, you have to think about, back in 1983, what it was like. It wasn't too many years later that we got Section 28, where the government literally were trying to eliminate LGBTQ plus people from the education system. That was just a few years later. So, you can imagine what it must have been like. We were also in the throes of the AIDS crisis, and these kids that were coming to London all of a sudden were being struck down by this gay disease, which we now know, of course, isn't the fact, but that's what they were seeing, and they were terrified. And so it was a real kind of scary time to be LGBTQ plus in the UK and in London in particular. And so these group of women got together and they created the first co-op. They literally got a house together with 8 beds in it, and they allowed people to come and have somewhere safe to live. And it was about people being able to really be themselves and be genuine and be authentic in who they were, and have somewhere safe to live. And that's a value that really runs through everything that Stonewall Housing does now. We feel very proud of that history that we have, and we want to make sure that everything we do in the future works alongside that as well. Stonewall Housing was the first organisation to get some funding from the GLC, as it was then, the General London Council, to really explore this issue of LGBTQ plus homelessness. And we were also the first organisation to get funding from Comic Relief to explore LGBTQ plus issues as well. And so it was that kind of trailblazing idea that, again, we want to hold on to and take forward now into our next phase of development. So now what I want to do is to think about, okay, well, how many people are there in the UK that might need our help? And why are there, people who are LGBTQ plus and homeless? Why is this a thing, And so if we think about the most common reasons for people to become homeless and for people that we work with to become homeless, we see parental rejection, domestic abuse and violence. We also see mental health up there. And, I imagine that a few of you are thinking now, well, actually, that's the same as the people that we're working with that might not be LGBTQ plus. And you're absolutely right. Those reasons for homelessness kind of are through the whole community. The difference with the people that we work with is about just under 80% of people tell us that they were rejected from their family home because of their identity. So this is just because of who they were. So because they were gay, lesbian, bisexual, trans, queer, that is the reason why they became homeless. 80% of those people. And just a few months ago, in around September time, I want to tell you about a young person that we were working with. He was 18 years old, and he, on a Friday night, he was, kind of building up the courage, and he was getting excited, and he told his mum that he was gay. He introduced his mum to his authentic self, And what his mum did was ask him to leave the house. And actually, I'm not going to say that. What his mum did was kick him out of home. This 18-year-old who describes his childhood as really positive, or really kind of pleasant childhood, all of a sudden was kicked out of home immediately, with only the belongings that he had. And this young person was not street smart. This was the first time that they'd experienced any kind of vulnerability, and they didn't know what to do. And so he was kind of like, didn't know where to go. He had no one to stay with, but he did know that some homeless people sleep in the park. And so that's what he did. He went to Hyde Park. He went there on Friday. He slept there on Friday, Saturday and Sunday, and he was absolutely terrified. And on Monday, thank goodness, a dog walker found him and approached him. She could see that actually this young person was particularly vulnerable and needed some support. So she approached him had a conversation with them, got them some food, and eventually they contacted us. And thank God we were able to find somewhere for that young person to go. And actually, he's doing really well now and thriving. But the reason why I tell that story is because this happened just a few weeks ago. It wasn't a long time ago. It was in 2020. And it mirrors the experience that our founders had back in 1983. And this is happening right now. The other thing that we have to think about is the experience of bullying that LGBTQ plus people have. And when we talk to our service users, they tell us that they experience bullying at school, at home, in the workplace, in the community, in their youth groups. Everywhere that they go, they're experiencing some kind of bullying. And so that really compounds this level of vulnerability. And you can start to kind of think to yourself, you know, if you were LGBTQ plus and homeless, where would you get your support from? Now let's have a look at numbers. So statistics in homelessness is difficult, and statistics in LGBTQ plus homelessness is nearly impossible. But there was an international study that was done in 2019. And what they found was that somewhere between 20 and 40%, it differs for different countries, somewhere between 20 and 40% of homeless people are LGBTQ plus. Now, if you think about the UK, and for some of you, you may have noticed that in the census this year, for the first time, we're going to have a question about LGBTQ plus identity. So we might get closer to the truth of what the makeup of the UK looks like, which I'm really excited about finding out. But the best estimate we have at the minute is about 6%. So if 6% of the population are LGBTQ plus, why is it that 20 to 40% of homeless people are LGBTQ plus? Our colleagues at AKT did a study a few years ago with young people in particular, and they found that it was 24% of the cohort that was LGBTQ plus. Shelter did some research looking at the number of homeless people in the UK. And here we're talking about the official statistics around homelessness, not the people that we would consider at risk of homelessness, those who actually meet the criteria. And Shelter estimated that we've got about 320,000 people in the UK at any one time. And so if we believe that stat of 20 to 40%, we're looking at something like 64,000 or to 128,000 people who are LGBTQ plus and homeless. Now, I told you before that we work with 1,200, so it's a fraction of the people that actually need our support. And so that means that there's probably thousands of people who are getting their support through mainstream organizations. I'm going to ask you some questions now in the Q&A that I want us to kind of reflect on together and have a think about. So here's the question. How many of your customers are LGBTQ plus? And one of the people from CIH is going to put these in the Q&A for us now so that you can see the different options. What I'd like you to do is to upvote the question that that you think is the right answer. So we've got kind of 10%, 20%, 30%, or don't know. And I just want you to do a little upvote just so we can get a bit of an idea of, you know, what LGBTQ plus people are getting support in mainstream organizations. Now, some of you and some organizations won't be able to answer this question. And they won't be able to answer this question simply because they don't ask. So whenever they're customers, and when I say customers here, I mean residents, the people that come to you for support, the people that live in your accommodation, your neighbors, you know, the people who need housing support. Often we find that people don't ask their customers whether they're LGBTQ plus. And when we go out and do our training around the country, one of the things that staff tell us is that they feel awkward to do it. They're really worried about saying the wrong thing. They're really anxious that they're going to upset someone by asking that question. They think it's very intrusive. They're not quite sure of the language and what the right way of saying it is. And so I would argue that actually that's one of the reasons that it just hasn't fallen into practice, because people aren't feeling confident to ask the question. Others of you won't be able to answer this question because even now in 2021, LGBTQ plus people are disguising their true identity when they come and ask for support. Even now, they're not able to be their authentic selves when they go to places that are designed to really help and support them. I'll have a wee look at the answers to the questions later on, but if you just kind of upvote, and I'll come back to it at the end of the presentation. So why is it that people in the UK would find it difficult to be their true authentic selves? And why do we need specific services for LGBTQ plus people? This is what people ask me all the time. They kind of think, well, look, you know, why don't they just go to their doctor and get the support from their doctor? You know, like, surely the NHS is really inclusive. Surely the local authorities are really inclusive. You know, why is it that we need these specific services? And so here's some stats. Now, these come from a number of different areas, some from the Stonewall research that was done 2 or 3 years ago, some from the big national LGBT survey that we did as well. And I'm happy to share the links with people. But what we learned was that 1 in 5 LGBTQ plus people have experienced a hate crime. And I want you to just think about that. Think about 5 of your gay friends or 5 of your LGBTQ plus friends. 1 of them will have experienced some kind of hate crime. Now, we know that people, hate crimes are increasing. If you look at the statistics every year, and some of that will be about, you know, better reporting. And we know that the police are doing a fantastic job. We hear really good stories about the police engaging with people who've experienced LGBTQ plus hate crime. But some of that is a real indication that this is still happening. I mean, you know the stories, don't you? You've heard about those 2 young women who were forced to kiss on a bus and then attacked. You've heard about the young couple who were walking along the river holding hands and were beaten almost to death. You know, like, really challenging situations for people experiencing these hate crimes. 70% of people who are LGBTQ plus avoid being open about their identity. So 70% of people are not able to be their true selves. And what we're talking about here is people like me, you know, people like me who are not able to hold their partner's hand whenever we go out for a walk. I've been with my partner for 12 years and we're the type of couple that want to hold hands and want to be affectionate with each other. You know, one of those couples. But we can't do it because we know it's not safe. We live in London and we know it's not safe for us to hold hands whenever we go out. I think that's disgraceful, you know. And if you think about, you know, I'm the chief exec of an LGBTQ plus organization, you know, I'm not particularly vulnerable. Think about some of our vulnerable service users and some of the vulnerable people that we work with and what it must be like for them as well. 1 in 8 people have been attacked at work. And when I say attacked at work, I mean physically attacked at work because they were LGBTQ plus. 1 in 8 of us have had that experience. I mean, part of this makes me want to laugh because I can't even imagine being attacked at work at all. Never mind being attacked at work because of who you were. And then the most shocking statistic, in my opinion, is this one at the end, which is 10% of people, 10% of the general population in the UK believe that LGBTQ plus people are dangerous to others, that they're predatory, that they want to cause harm to young people, that they want to cause harm to their colleagues. And, you know, that to me is something that is really shocking here in 2021, that people still have that kind of opinion. Now, as you start to think about that experience, you might also start to understand why it is that LGBTQ plus people continue to find it difficult to be open about who they are. Even now, even though we're allowed to get married now, you know, like, isn't that good news? Even though all the laws have changed and discrimination against someone because they're LGBT is illegal, we're not able to do that anymore. But even all of those really positive moves forward, there's still a lot of real trauma associated with being LGBTQ plus in the UK. In preparation for today, I wanted to have we look at what our service users are saying. So these are the people that we've worked with, and we ask them questions about engaging with an LGBTQ plus organization. So you can see here 97% of people say that it's important to them that they have workers who understand what it's like to be LGBTQ+. 91% say that having a worker who is LGBTQ+ makes it easier for them to access support. And 84% of people say that they wouldn't be able to get the same type of support from a non-LGBTQ+ organization. Now, of course, we know that that last stat isn't true. You know, LGBTQ+ people are getting support from mainstream organizations. Some of you will be providing that support, and they're getting really fantastic support. But the interesting thing here for me is that this is what people think. You know, this is what people, when they are looking for somewhere to get support, they think they're not going to get the same level of support from a non-LGBTQ+ organization. We work with a young person who was originally placed in a mainstream hostel. He had his own room, shared bathroom in a mainstream hostel. And he was experiencing homophobia from other people that lived there, and actually from some of the staff as well, which is rare, but it does happen. And one of the things that happened to him was that somebody scratched a homophobic word into his door, the door of his bedroom. It's a word that I wouldn't even repeat just to tell the story. And he was terrified. And he tells us that he used to listen outside his door to make sure that there was no one there and that the coast was clear before he would go to the bathroom or before he would leave to go to the supermarket. And that experience has really challenged him and really scarred him in terms of his experience of trauma. And again, it's just an illustration of what it's like to be LGBTQ+ and to be in that vulnerable situation. Okay, so that's kind of our journey up until now, a little bit about why we need to have specific LGBTQ+ organizations, and a little bit of the prevalence of the work and the people that need our support. And now what I want to do is to talk to you about what our plans are moving forward. And I'm hoping that I'm going to inspire some of you to think about your work with LGBTQ+ people and what you might be able to do to make things better for them. So the key thing that we're working on in the next financial year is to launch the first national housing helpline for LGBTQ+ people who need support around their housing. Now, this is kind of building upon what we already do. You know that if someone calls us from outside of London, we don't hang up the phone. We work with them and we provide them with support, but we don't have the same level of casework for them. And we don't have the resource to really promote this work and make sure that it's happening throughout the whole of the UK. That's what we're focusing on moving forward. One of the things that we want to do is to create a resource directory. So to really understand who is already doing this work across the UK, where are people getting LGBTQ+ specific housing support? And actually, we've got a tiny little link for you to have a look at, because I want to ask you, who are these people, and start to build that resource directory today. So in the chat function, you'll see there's a link to a survey. It's just 3 questions, and it says, do you provide LGBTQ+ specific work? Tell us a little bit about it, and who's the best person to contact in your organization. That will be the foundation of this new resource directory that we are building. And so I would really encourage everybody to take a moment to do that. Then what we want to do is to really secure some referral pathways both in and out of Stonewall Housing. So if you identify someone that you think needs our help, you and I are going to have a really good relationship where you can refer that person in knowing that they'll get the support they need. And likewise, if we identify someone that might need your support, we'll be able to refer out. The other thing I think this helpline will help us with is to identify and evidence LGBTQ+ housing need across the UK. And once we've kind of done that, I think what we're going to do is identify hotspots, you know, like Brighton, for example, might be a particular hotspot, or Leeds or Manchester. And when we do that, we want to partner up with people and say, look, we know that there's a lot of LGBTQ+ people that need support in this particular area. Let's work together to make sure that they've got what they need. So that regional partnership is in our planning moving forward. And then the last thing that we want to do is, I've written it here as support organizations to come out. And that is a saying that I heard from Baroness Barker, where what she's saying is that organizations need to come out first so that their staff can come out and their service users can come out and their residents can come out. And so we want to support people to do that as well, so that, you know, this is really in recognition that we know we are not going to be able to work with every single person that needs our help. So what we're going to try and do is help the organizations that do that work to make sure it's LGBTQ+ specific. So I've just got a couple of slides left now. This one is about our vision. So this is the vision of Stonewall Housing. Lesbians, gay men, bi, trans and queer people will live in safer homes without fear of discrimination, violence or abuse. I already know that many of you here today, in fact, probably all of you, share this vision with us. And I want to invite you to come along the journey with us. And in my next slide, I've identified a few things that you could potentially do to help us. So this is our building the House of Stonewall. Do you see how I've done it with the bricks? So the first line is that foundation that we have, the stuff that we already do. The next line is our plans moving forward for the National LGBTQ+ Housing Advice Helpline. And then the next layer of bricks is the things that I think you can do with our support. The first one is share good practice. Fill out that little questionnaire that I've sent round. Shout about the LGBTQ+ work you're doing. Tell us about it so we can shout about it and really promote it across the whole of the UK. You can sign up to our colleagues' House Pride pledge, and we've got a speaker coming up shortly who'll be able to tell you a bit about that. That's a really fantastic way of demonstrating that you're committed to LGBTQ+ issues. Maybe that's a first step in your journey to coming out. We've got a couple of roundtable events coming up in March that Kat's going to tell us about earlier. Come along, get involved. We would love to have you there and to really learn from what you're doing to help inform our plans moving forward. Of course, you could commission us to do some specific work for LGBTQ+ residents. You could work with Tina on our inclusion standard and make sure that you're able to demonstrate that you're an inclusive provider. You could become a champion for us, and we could work together to co-create services that we haven't even thought about yet. So I guess the invitation that I have for you is that we are absolutely determined to make sure that every single LGBTQ+ person across the UK is getting a really well-informed, inclusive service. And we know that we can't do it on our own. We want to do it with you. So if you're kind of thinking, yes, this is something we should get involved in, yes, let's get on board with this, then please get in touch with us. All of our contact details are on our profiles today, and Kat will send you out some information after the event. But just give us a shout and we'll work together to make it happen. Thank you so much for your time today. And thank you for your ongoing commitment to LGBTQ+ issues. Happy LGBTQ History Month. And later we're in a panel for Q&A, so I'll look forward to seeing you all there. Just before I go, I want to look, Rebecca, at the Q&A.
Yeah. Hopefully Sarah will be able to get that sorted for us in the background. And we'll be able to get that popped through. I can see a few people putting things into the chat box as well, which is good. So if you have got any questions, if you can jot them down and save them up for the panel, that will make that bit a lot more interesting as well, if you can save any burning questions, that is.
Can I just tell you, Rebecca, before I finish, so the #1 kind of response to that little survey of how many of your customers are LGBTQ+ is I don't know. I don't know the answer to that question. And so I think that's a really nice little illustration of the things that we were talking about. Thank you so much. And I won't take up any more time. Thanks, Rebecca.
All right. Thanks, Stephen. Great presentation, as always. And for those of you who are looking at the time and thinking it's my poor chairing skills, we do have some time that we've won back later in the day. So it's not complete chaos already, just to reassure people. But I will ask John to join us now. So that's John Stevens, whose day role working with Clarion, but then also John is the co-chair of the House Proud network who have done tons of research and really good work. And I can see a few people already, John. It's almost perfect because they're asking about their staff networking groups and forums that they've set up. So amazing introduction. I'll hand over to you. Thanks, John.
Thanks, Rebecca. And good morning, everybody. Let me just get my slides set up a second. And they're not showing, which is always a good start. Let me just try again. I might need somebody from CIH to present my slides instead, if that's possible. Let me just share my entire screen because that might work better. Nope, that's not working either. This is a typical fail for. Here we go. Thank you very much, whoever's presenting. That's brilliant. So good morning, everybody. I'm John Stevens. As was mentioned, I am Partnerships and Projects Manager for Clarion Futures, and I'm also co-chair of Houseproud. So first of all, a little bit about Houseproud, a bit of background. Houseproud was set up in 2014 as a network group for LGBT people working in social housing. Membership of Houseproud is free and simple. Anybody who works in social housing can be a member, and would just need to send us an email in order to sign up. Although membership of Houseproud is based on individuals rather than organisations, we now have around 60 housing providers represented on our mailing list, and this includes housing associations, ALMOs, local authorities and care providers, many of which are represented in the conversation today. Our aims are to facilitate and develop best practice on LGBT issues in housing, provide networking opportunities, social events, and to campaign on and for LGBT housing related issues. So specifically, I'm here today to talk about our pioneering No Place Like Home research, which was to understand LGBT experiences of social housing, and also our pledge scheme, both of which were developed in association with the University of Surrey. So we could go on to the next slide. That'd be fantastic. No Place Like Home is the largest study of its kind undertaken, and we engaged over 300 people in interviews, focus groups, and through surveys. The study aimed to uncover LGBT residents' experience of social housing and what landlords could do to address any of the issues identified by the research. It was undertaken by the University of Surrey on behalf of Houseproud and was funded by 6 housing associations, which were Clarion, Genesis, Hanover, L&Q, Optivo, and Riverside. And the report that we put together was launched at City Hall in February 2018. So the research led to the development of the Houseproud Pledge Scheme, which you can see on the right of your screen. The Pledge Scheme is something that all social housing providers can sign up to free of charge to demonstrate their commitment to LGBT resident equality and support. So first of all, I'll talk about the research that we undertook, and then I'll talk about the Pledge Scheme. So if we could go on to the next slide, please. So despite the success of our project, as Houseproud, we certainly weren't the first to survey LGBT social housing residents about their experiences. In 2014, for example, a Stonewall Scotland survey of 1,000 LGBT residents found that 1 in 5 expect to be treated worse than heterosexual people when applying for social housing. Our study was also prompted by questions from frontline housing staff and residents about why residents were asked about their sexual orientation as part of resident profiling surveys, which were required by the regulator at the time. So in response to this, in 2015, I worked as a member of the research team at Affinity Sutton, and we commissioned the London South Bank University to undertake interviews with people attending a sponsored event at the Metro Centre in Greenwich. The questions that we asked people in that short survey focused on LGBT visibility, discrimination, and residents were also asked about the services offered by their landlords. And we published the findings of that very small scale survey in our report, LGBT Experience of Housing, which you see to the right of your screen. And what we were surprised to learn from that report was that despite the efforts of housing providers to champion LGBT issues, many housing providers in the top Stonewall 100 workplace index, for example, a number of residents expressed serious concerns about the lack of support and possible homophobia from landlords. So the surprising findings from our small study, which undermined our self-image that we were champions of LGBT equality and support prompted us to think about the need for a sector-wide response. So if we could go on to the next slide, please. So as part of efforts to explore options for a sector-wide response, I presented the findings of our small study at a House Proud meeting, and the response that I received from that was overwhelming. So I was inundated with questions as well as comments detailing personal experiences, and it was clear that there was enthusiasm to take the work forward and for House Proud to lead on the issue. So together with House Proud members, I scoped a research brief, and with this was able to raise funding from 6 housing providers for a project. We were also able to secure Professor Andrew King at Surrey University to deliver the research. Andrew had previously undertaken work to understand the housing options and choices for older LGBT people, and reflecting the goodwill from people that we encountered throughout the project, Andrew offered his time to work on a project for free. So that all sounds very simple, but I think it took us at least a year to get from the point where I presented at the House Proud meeting to where we had the funding in place, where we were able to secure Andrew as well to deliver the research. So if you go on to the next slide, please. So to talk about the No Place Like Home research specifically, we followed 3 clearly defined stages. So throughout the whole project, in stage 1, we had 2 user expert consultation panels, which enabled the researchers to design the research questions and also the collection tools as well. So those were a resident consultation panel and also a staff member consultation panel as well. So in stage 2, we got into more the meat of the research. So the University of Surrey hosted 3 focus groups, and those were broken down by age. The different age bands were 18 to 24, 25 to 64, and 65 plus. And each focus group, there was a mix of different residents by gender and by ethnic background in those focus groups. Frances, our researcher from the University of Surrey, she also undertook mobile interviews with residents, and that was one-on-one interviews with a number of residents. And the reason it was mobile is that she went to visit them in their homes or in a place where they felt comfortable to talk about their experiences. So it might be a local cafe or something like that. And then in addition to all of this kind of more qualitative work, we also had an online survey and a paper form survey as well, which went out to residents, and approximately 300 social housing residents completed that survey. And stage 3 of the work was really about dissemination. So House Proud and the University of Surrey jointly published the No Place Like Home report. And as I said, we launched that at London City Hall. And London City Hall also offered their space for free. So reflecting the goodwill, the thread that ran through the whole project. So if you go on to the next slide, just an overview of some of the key findings from the research. So mainly, despite the equality laws that are in place, the study found that some LGBT residents did not believe that they had been listened to or taken seriously by their landlord or treated equally. I think that's kind of the headline finding. Some of the other findings, LGBT social housing residents, we found that may modify their home in some way when visited by a housing officer or a repairs person to hide their sexual orientation or gender identity. A significant number of residents worried about their safety and were much less likely to feel a sense of belonging to their neighbourhood than the general population. And this is most pronounced for trans residents. And also LGBT social housing residents wanted their social housing provider to be more proactive on inclusion and to be openly supportive of LGBT issues. So that ultimately led to the pledge scheme work. So just a bit more detail on some of the findings from our research. So related to safety and belonging, although 78% of survey respondents felt that they lived in a neighbourhood, and we're on to the next slide, sorry, 32% felt that their neighbourhood was not a safe place to live as an LGBT person. Trans residents were less likely to feel safe. 60% of trans residents said that they didn't feel safe. And some of the more qualitative aspects of the research highlighted some very disturbing experiences of harassment and hate crime for trans residents particularly. 91% of trans residents said that they would not feel comfortable having a neighbour in their home, and some residents reported experience of harassment and abuse from neighbours. Yet some of these people felt that housing providers did not deal with this effectively. Only 43% of survey respondents said that they felt a sense of belonging to their local area. And this was much less than comparable national surveys, where 80% of social housing residents said that they feel they belong to their neighbourhoods. Trans residents were the least likely to express a belonging to their neighbourhood. So only 23% of trans residents expressed a sense of belonging to their neighbourhoods. And overall, respondents reported feeling excluded in multiple ways, which combined gave a sense of social isolation. So on to the next slide about hypervigilance and views of social housing providers. 21% of survey respondents reported that they were uncomfortable having a repairs person entering the home, and 24% their housing officer. And we found that women were much less likely to want to let people into their home. Although a minority, a significant number of residents reported changing their home environment in some way before these people entered their home to conceal their gender identity or sexual orientation. And this might include moving pictures, books, or DVDs. This is more common amongst gay men and other groups. And so 1 in 5 gay men responded that they always, or most of the time, hid some of their personal possessions to conceal their sexual identity, sexual orientation. Survey respondents did not agree that their housing provider was always responsive to their concerns or sensitive to the needs of LGBT people. However, 56% did feel that their housing provider was approachable. So it wasn't all bad in our survey. And residents felt strongly that housing providers should visibly acknowledge that their LGBT residents, that they wanted to show that they're being treated equal. This included being appropriately represented in policy and tenancy documentation, and 72% of residents thought that it was a good idea to introduce some form of certification for housing providers to show their support for LGBT people. So on to the next slide about the House Proud Pledge Scheme. To take forward the momentum and goodwill that we generated from the No Place Like Home research, we once again joined forces with the University of Surrey to develop the House Proud Pledge Scheme. So the scheme is something that all social housing providers can sign up to demonstrate their commitment to LGBT resident equality and support. The pledge was developed in association with residents, staff members, and sector leaders from across the country to address the issues raised by No Place Like Home. So we did have a series of workshops with all of those different stakeholders, which fed into the scheme. So in particular, the pledge scheme addresses the issue of resident trust. It provides a framework for landlords to work with involved residents to take action and to demonstrate their commitment to equality and support. And it also aligns very neatly with the aspirations of the social housing green and white papers as well. So once signed up, housing providers can commit to 3 core commitments, and following the delivery of these, landlords can then work with involved residents on a project to address some of the issues identified by the research. So onto the next slide. Work on a scheme was funded by the University of Surrey and 4 housing associations. Other organisations, including Stonewall Housing and the Greater London Authority, were represented in our steering group, as were LGBT residents. The project kicked off in July 2018 with a meeting of CEOs and senior executives, and they gave us their backing for the project and urged us to be ambitious and to address the issues highlighted by the research. And 2 further workshops were held with LGBT residents in London and Brighton to identify the priorities. And those residents were very clear that they wanted the scheme to help move housing providers beyond tokenism and to visibly commit to taking actions to resolve the issues that everyone felt were there. So finally, a workshop was held with staff members to review the feasibility of the scheme and the proposed options. So on to the next slide. And this just outlines what the different aspects of the pledge scheme are. There are 2 levels of accreditation under the House Proud Pledge Scheme. And once signed up, landlords are expected to deliver 3 core commitments and report back to House Proud within a year to evidence that these have been achieved. So just a basic outline of these 3 commitments. By the end of the first year, we expect landlords to have formal arrangements in place to consult with LGBT residents on an ongoing basis. And we expect landlords to demonstrate how residents can input into decision making. The second of the commitments, when landlords sign up to the scheme, they receive the House Proud Pledge logo, which we expect to be displayed in resident communications. And that should be accompanied by an explanation on the provider's website about what the scheme means. We also expect housing providers to publicise the scheme to staff members and to actively support colleagues to develop the commitments. And the final one of the Pledge Pioneer commitments, by the end of the first year, we expect providers to have started rolling out a programme of training focusing on LGBT lives. Landlords will need to clearly demonstrate that this training is being rolled out to frontline staff members, including repairs operatives and housing officers. And the reason we said that was because that was the particular issue highlighted by the research. So once housing providers are able to demonstrate that they've delivered the 3 core commitments of Pledge Pioneer, there's then the option, if landlords choose to work towards Pledge Plus. And Pledge Plus is the higher level of accreditation in the scheme. And this requires landlords to work with residents to create a specific project that addresses some of the issues highlighted by the No Place Like Home research. So that's kind of a co-created project with involved residents. So just on to the next slide, please. How can my organisation sign up to the pledge scheme? Well, signing up is free of charge. What you need to do is to just send us an email, and we'll get back in touch with you to confirm some of the details and what those next steps are. Once you've signed up, you'll receive a copy of the pledge scheme logo, which will help you to publicise your involvement in the scheme. And if you look at the House Proud website as well, it hosts a number of resources to offer more about the pledge scheme and also the No Place Like Home research as well. So if you do choose to sign up to the scheme, you'd be in good company. We recently announced the first tranche of housing providers who have been accredited to the scheme. We announced that a few weeks ago. The housing providers that have been awarded Pledge Pioneer status, L&Q, Network Homes, Swan, Home Group, and Notting Hill Genesis. And there are 2 organisations that have been awarded the Pledge Plus, the higher level of accreditation, and those are Clarion Housing Group and Anchor Hanover. And since we announced the accreditations a few weeks ago, we've received a number of inquiries from a range of providers about joining the scheme. So as you can see, as soon as we get this going, there's kind of a snowball effect with this. So that concludes my whistle-stop tour of the No Place Like Home research and the pledge scheme. So thanks for listening to me. And I was going to say, are there any questions? But I think there's going to be a Q&A event later on.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, John. Another great presentation. I think some of the insights from the research there will hopefully stick with people and probably sound quite familiar as well, especially given the fact that lots of the people on the session today will probably be involved in supporting LGBTQ people anyway. So John will be back later, so please do, as I said earlier, jot down your questions or pop them in the chat or the Q&A, and I'll make a note of them for later on when we welcome John back. If we can get John, there we go, he's left the stage, good. We are running slightly behind, but as I mentioned earlier, it is in complete control because we have got a bit of time back now. So we are onto a session now that begins to look at people's lived experience as LGBTQ plus with housing and also homelessness as well, which has been touched on in Stephen's presentation earlier on. We were due to be joined by Lucia Fitzgerald and Angela Cooper, but due to some technical issues, what they've had to do is pre-record an interview for us with the glamorous Kat Haldane, who managed to play host to them yesterday afternoon. So if there are any questions in particular for Lucia and Angela following on from the session, then we can put you in touch with them. They're always really keen to share their experiences as well. So hopefully what shall happen now is that we'll magically see a video appear with Kat hosting, speaking to Lucia and Angela about their experiences, and then I'll come back on to invite Cory onto stage as well, who's one of the House of Stonewall ambassadors. So Sharon or Sarah, if you could press play. Brilliant. Hopefully, I know a couple of people were mentioning they had some sound issues, so I'll just put the link to the video in there for people to catch that afterwards, or watch it perhaps in the networking break that will follow the end of this session. Really, really powerful. And I know, you know, when I first heard Lucia and Angela speak and I watched their film Invisible Women, it's hard to actually hold it together when you hear that. And I think, you know, probably, you know, what we're about to hear now will really hopefully hit home for people as well. So I've been joined again by Kat, who's going to introduce Cory, who's one of the ambassadors of the House of Stonewall. So I'll hand over to you, Kat.
Thanks, Bex, and thank you everyone for coming today, and I hope that you're already getting a lot out of the session. I just wanted to say that talking to those incredible women was such a privilege yesterday, and it really hit home that, you know, touching on what Stephen said earlier, this happened last week. You know, these experiences that Lucia had at 15 years old, fleeing Manchester, fleeing Ireland to find a better life in Manchester, and the horrific ordeal that she experienced along the way. These things are still happening now, and that's what Stonewall Housing helps to do, is to hold the hands of LGBTQ plus people who are homeless or about to be made homeless, and help them navigate that pathway through. So it is now my great pleasure to introduce an amazing ambassador of ours, who is, his name's Cory P. He is a poet, actor and facilitator in his own right. He's been commissioned and published by the likes of the BBC, the National Youth Theatre, the National Theatre, the Lyrics Organics and the Barbican. He's one of our founding ambassadors for the House of Stonewall. And now as an alumnus, he champions the work that we do by raising awareness, by helping us with fundraising initiatives. And he's here today to talk to you about his experiences of living and working with Stonewall Housing. So, hand over to you, Cory.
Hi, my name's Cory Peterson, and yeah, I am a House of Stonewall ambassador, and I'm actually really nervous about doing this, because Stonewall Housing means so much to me, and they've helped me so much, and they've helped people I care about loads too. And the best way I can explain to you the power of Stonewall Housing and everything that they're talking about and saying is by sharing a few of my experiences. So just a brief bit about me. So I was homeless between the ages of 13 and 24 years old, and I basically had to leave home at 13 because of my relationship with my biological father, quite abusive relationship, and yeah, I didn't trust, for various reasons, the authorities at the time. I wasn't really raised to, and I wasn't in communities that usually where you're told to, or where you're made to feel like you can. Grew up in places like Tottenham and Hackney and places like that, and yeah, so I left home, went to stay with my grandma, and then she moved away, and I found myself having to couch surf with different family and friends. And for the first 5 years, that's all it was. There were only 3 nights in that period where I had nowhere to sleep. I worked really hard. I started getting to McDonald's at 4 a.m. in the morning, partially because it was my closest thing to solace at the time. I couldn't afford to buy the food there, but I could sit there, do my work, listen to music, just be in my own space and head. And I ended up getting 18 GCSEs, a Fulbright scholarship to an American university somehow, and where I was double majoring in neuroscience and theatre and dance. And my mental health went into decline. I missed my mom, my brother, my family. And I asked the university to allow me to study abroad, but in London, at home, at UCL with someone called Sarah Jane Blakemore. I tried to make it work staying at home again, but it was a life-threatening situation. It was worse than it had been at times in the past, due to threats to my life from my father, physical abuse and emotional abuse. So I found myself sleeping rough and in other environments for quite a decently long period of time. Now, then at this point, as my mental and physical health started to go into decline, and I found somewhere called New Horizons to refer me on to an emergency temporary accommodation, then an emergency night-by-night service, and into eventually Stonewall housing. And yeah, just a bit about how my sexuality and like identity played into it. Now, I can't say categorically that it was the only thing that did, because I'm not in my father's head, basically. But what I can say is he grew up in Jamaica, and one thing that was an aspect of my life at home was whenever I tried to express myself or live out loud in a sense, I was punished for it. I came from a household within which I was persecuted for just being me. And I was driven away from the people that I care about most in the world, from my life, because I wasn't accepted as an individual within the home. It just felt safer to be away from it. And I couldn't stay there even at 13 years old. And in terms of the communities I grew up in, places like Tottenham, Hackney, and the cultures and the groups that I was raised within, it didn't feel completely safe to completely explore myself and my identity within those. Ignorance is bliss, be seen and not heard, be a man, toxic masculinity, it exists. And yeah, I am a man and I am who I am, but I didn't really have a space to explore who I was. And before I had that space, without the ability to explore who I was, I didn't know exactly how I could help myself, because how can you if you don't know yourself, right? But when I moved into Stonewall housing, that all changed. It was a crucial point in my life and my experiences. Just before I found Stonewall housing, I've been offered a job, £90 an hour, success skills seminars. And yeah, I had to turn it down. And all I would have had to do is just memorize a few things for the session, do a few things. Yeah, it's right down my street, £90 an hour. Oh, got lush. And I've never had problems getting jobs previously, but my mental health being in decline, I just didn't have the capacity to. That same year, I was diagnosed with complex PTSD, severe anxiety, and severe depression. And people like Jenny, the mental health advocate at Stonewall housing, a key worker, Kat, someone called Caris, everyone there, they really helped me. They gave me a space in which I felt as though I could be myself. B, I was surrounded by an immediate community, a tribe, a fam of people who shared common experiences. And well, on a basic level, they gave me my own room with a lock on the door, and that counted for a lot. While sleeping rough, there were a whole different arena of experiences, let's say, which led to my diagnosis with complex PTSD. And one thing that I really struggled with was to feel settled. And they give me constant reassurance. They were always there when I became defensive, when I got a bit too much, as I think I was a lot of the time. But they also, somehow I was able to trust them. And I was literally clinically diagnosed with things that reduced my ability to do so. I had to diminish. When I arrived, I was just trembling in corners. I had this big red blanket, and I would just hide. I couldn't communicate with people. My social anxiety was through the roof. And slowly I moved on to achieving things that would have been hard to achieve if I hadn't had some of those experiences. They came with me to appointments. They helped me through sorting through the benefits and systems that I needed to get through and navigate. And when I didn't feel as though I could advocate for myself or talk on my own behalf, or even at times when I felt I was trying to, but I wasn't being heard or listened to, they spoke on my behalf, and then they empowered me to continue doing it myself when I could. And aside from that, beyond all of that, they gave me and my friends, friends that I will have and cherish for life, opportunities for creative expression as well. And that played a crucial role in my progress and recovery too. And yeah, at this moment in time, as of 2019, I moved into a long-term move on. So my own flat, imagine, oh my gosh, 11 years. 11 years coming, but finally there. And I played a part after that in however small the roles were or the parts were in shows at the National Theatre, and even with Steve McQueen on his recent Small Acts project. And at this moment in time, with the therapy I'm doing, the bits of training I'm doing, everything I'm doing, there's an opportunity for my dreams to come true. None of that would have been possible without Stonewall Housing. But what's more than that, I might not be alive if it weren't for the support they gave me at the time where I needed it the most. And yeah, but even since having moved out of hostels and into my own property, they've helped me with resettlement. Like, the nature of Move On for me was that I didn't know which borough I would be moved into. And when I got moved into a certain borough, it was like the keys were there, your tenancy starts, and there was this big rush to get me to transition into the independent living, away from the hostel and the community that I'd found within the hostel, the family, and into independent living, and just to get myself like white goods and a bed to sleep on and stuff like that. And they worked around the clock with what little time they had, and with the big case workload that they had, and with their own lives, and just to get me those things. And they've done the same for, as I say, people I care about, friends, people I consider family. And they work tirelessly, non-stop. They put me in contact with a resettlement worker to support me with certain things that wouldn't have been offered in the hostels, but were relevant to the move on option and independent living, and things I needed to work on. And even at a time where they are not obligated to help me, they do. And yeah, now I'm part of the House of Stonewall, and it's one of the things I'm most proud of. So yeah. Now, having come from a place where I was persecuted for being who I was, where I couldn't live out loud, where I learned to internalize all the things the world seemed to say about me, into an environment where I was celebrated for being who I was, where I felt safe, where I felt like I was surrounded by people who shared those same experiences, and which validated my experiences in a certain sort of way, which gave me connection, a reason to keep going, motivation, all of those things, as I say, saved my life. So right now, like, all I can ask for you to do is listen to these people. That's really as simple as it is. They need more money, because the amount that they do for people like me, and for people with experiences similar to mine, with what little time they have and what little resources they have, they just deserve more. But also, more people need access to this service. As I say, this is not a service that can just empower you and give you the means to help turn your life around and change your life and grow into the person you are and who you deserve to be. This is also, beyond that, an organization that helps to save lives and spread the word. Because if that's not enough reason to, then I don't know what could be, to be honest. And that's me. That's me, Cory P. Yeah, and thank you, Stonewall Housing. Yeah.
Cory, that was insane. Thank you so much. And I can't even imagine like how much kind of courage it takes to like come and speak about that, you know, given what you've gone through. And I think it's just so important because there'll be so many other people now that were you 11 years ago that are going to be hearing that just get blown away by what you've said. So thank you so much. And you can see you're getting loads of like virtual high fives, high tens, everything in the chat. So like you've got a fan club now, which is amazing. So that's why we've got to bring you back for the panel after this break. But I hope that everybody that's listened to Lucia, Angela and Cory can really see the impact and, you know, just get even a tiny bit of insight into what people from the LGBTQ plus community experience, whether it's growing up, you know, whatever. And I think some of the stats as well that you'll hear from Stephen as well, like I think it's something crazy, like 70% or over 70% of people that go through their services come from a BAME background as well. And I think that speaks to some of the stuff you mentioned, Cory, that so many like young people and, you know, older people are really struggling to live out loud, which I think is a great way to kind of phrase it. So thank you, Cory. Everyone, please can you save your questions as well for the panel. But what we thought would be really good now, given how hard hitting and emotional that might have been, it might just be me that's kind of feeling emotional after that, to take a break. You will bounce back onto your table, so you'll have a chance to meet loads of different people, share your experiences, share what you're doing, share your challenges, everything like that. And then if we can join back probably at 12 o'clock, so if we take a half an hour break, we'll let you know when we're coming back. Grab a tea, a coffee, grab a wee if you need to as well, and then we'll come back at 12 o'clock where we'll be joined by all of our speakers again to ask all of the questions that I'm sure you've built up over the course of this morning. Thanks everyone.